My name is Dona Helena and today I want to tell you something that has been kept inside me for many years. A story that transformed me, that made me who I am, but that also taught me in the most painful way possible that not all love is true love. Before I begin, I ask you all to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Because it is really very difficult to tell this story of my life to other people. I would also like to ask you to comment on where you are watching this story from. I promise that I will read and respond to your comments. If you saw me when I was young, you would see a girl full of dreams, with bright eyes and an open heart. I believed in love like the ones we read in books, saw in movies or heard in songs on the radio. I wanted a beautiful love, a happy marriage, a peaceful life with someone who loved me unconditionally. And then Zhao appeared. He entered my life like a light breeze, like an enchantment. Zhao was not just any man. He was different. He was one of those who knew what to say, how to greet, how to touch the right spot in a woman's heart. I remember the day we met as if it were yesterday. It was a sunny afternoon and in a city square I was sitting on a bench, distracted by a book, when I felt someone approaching. Young lady. I hope I'm not bothering you, but I've already passed by here 3 times just to get the courage to talk to you. I looked up and saw that tall man with a smile on the corner of his mouth and eyes full of mischief and sweetness at the same time. My fingers trembled as I closed the book. Oh, no, it's not bothering you. He smiled that smile that I'll never forget. I didn't know if it was more beautiful to see you reading or to see you looking at me. Now I laughed, a shy but sincere laugh. No one had ever spoken to me like that. No one had ever looked at me the way he looked at me. The conversation started there and before I realized it. We had already spent hours talking about everything. He was charming, he knew how to listen, he knew how to touch my soul with every word. The days went by and Zhao made a point of meeting me. He knew where I worked, where I liked to hang out, and like someone who didn't care, he always showed up at the right places at the right times with that smile that made my heart beat faster. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Helena, he said. And one day I'm going to make you my wife. I laughed. I found that boldness funny, but deep down that idea Zhao had something special growing inside me. He was confident, self-assured, strong, and made me feel protected. The months went by and love was born. I gave myself completely, without reservations, without doubts. When he asked me to be his girlfriend, I accepted immediately. When he asked me to marry him, I didn't hesitate. The wedding day was the most beautiful day of my life. The church was full. Everyone's eyes were on us. My mother cried with emotion. My friends sighed when they saw that man so in love by my side. I promise to love you, to take care of you, to protect you. He whispered in my ear, holding my hand tightly, and I believed him. I believed every word he said. At first, life with Zhao was a dream. He treated me like a queen. He took care of every detail. He did everything to see me happy. I remember the first trip we took together. He took me to the beach. We walked hand in hand on the sand and he said, Helena, I'm the luckiest man in the world to have you. I felt like the most loved woman in the world. But time passed and Zhao started to change. At first, it was just small things, the way he looked at me when I took a little longer to come back home, the persistent questions about who had spoken to me. You look different, he said. Are you sure you're not hiding anything from me? I laughed, finding it funny. Zhao, you're silly. Of course not. But he didn't laugh. He stayed serious, his gaze fixed as if he was trying to read my soul. And then the moments began in which he would stay silent for hours without saying why. When I asked him what had happened, he would answer dryly, nothing. But I felt that something was wrong. The first sign came at a family party. I was talking to a distant cousin when Zhao approached and grabbed my arm tightly. I think it's time for us to go. There was a tone in his voice that I didn't recognize, a cold tone, a tone that made me feel a chill. That night when we got home, he looked at me in a way he had never looked at me before. You think I'm an idiot? I saw how you looked at him. I was speechless. Zhao, for the love of God, he asked my cousin. He laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of happiness. It was a cold laugh filled with something I didn't understand yet. That night I felt fear for the first time, but I ignored it. I convinced myself that it was just jealousy, that he just loved me too much. Time passed and those little things became routine, the control, the cutting silence, the looks of distrust. But I still didn't know that that man who once made me feel like the most loved woman in the world would be the same one who would make me wish I had never crossed his path. I still didn't know that the Love that once made me smile would turn into my biggest nightmare, and when I realized it was too late. Time has a strange way of changing things. At first Zhao was everything I ever wanted: attentive, passionate, charming. He made me feel safe, loved, special, and I, blinded by love, didn't notice the little signs that were there all the time, trying to warn me that something wasn't right. The days by his side were intense. When Zhao was happy the world seemed perfect, but when he got angry a weight fell on our house. He didn't yell, he didn't make a fuss at first, but I felt something in him change. It started with little criticisms: you don't need to go out so much, stay with me more, this friend of yours, I don't know, she has an influence on you, you don't need to work, I take care of everything. At first I thought it was concern, I thought it was beautiful. Who doesn't want a husband who cares, who wants protect? But little by little I realized that I was distancing myself from the world without even noticing. My friends stopped visiting me, my outings became rare, my world began to be limited to Zhao. I didn't realize that that wasn't attention, it was control, and the control became something bigger. The first time I felt real fear was on a random night. I was preparing dinner, and without realizing I let the rice burn. Zhao came home from work tired, and as soon as he smelled it his expression changed. You don't know how to cook any food, right? He said, placing the plate on the table with force. It was just dinner, just burnt rice, but the look in his eyes, the tone of his voice made my heart race in a way I had never felt before. Sorry, love, I said, trying to lighten the mood. He remained silent for long minutes in silence while I tried to pretend that nothing was happening. That night I slept facing the opposite side of the bed, feeling a knot in my stomach without understanding. Such a small thing made me feel so scared. I thought it would pass, but it didn't. The silences began to become longer, the words colder. The way he looked at me was no longer the same. Zhao got irritated by small things, and I began to change because of that. I started to measure each word before speaking. I started to avoid everything that could irritate him. I started to apologize for things that weren't even my fault. And then came the first time he lost control. I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know at what moment. The man who said he loved me so much started treating me like someone lesser. It was a normal day like any other. He came home with a different look, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. I tried to ask him how his day was, but he didn't answer. John. Something happened. He looked at me, but it wasn't a normal look. There was something there. Something that made me freeze inside. You talk too much. The sentence came out dry and cold. I swallowed hard. I was just worried. And then he slammed his hand hard on the table, making the glass shake. I already said that I don't want to talk about it. That's when I realized that I couldn't be myself anymore. I realized that the man who made me smile also made me feel afraid. After that day, I started to notice the pattern. When he was calm, things seemed to go back to normal. But when he got angry, it was as if a weight took over the house. I walked slowly. I breathed. Hager, as if something were wrong. Wrong move could trigger something worse, and inside me something started to change. The love I felt started to be replaced by fear. The home that used to make me feel safe started to feel like a prison. The walls seemed smaller, as if they were surrounding me, as if the air was getting heavier every day, but I still couldn't see a way out because despite everything Zhao knew exactly what to say. Afterwards he apologized. He said he was in a state. He said he loved me. He would never do that again, and I didn't want to believe. I wanted to believe that he was still the man I fell in love with, but deep down I already knew. I knew that that man no longer existed, and maybe he never had. The silence inside that house became deafening. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a quiet afternoon or of a couple that understands each other without needing to speak. It was a heavy silence filled with tension of fear, a silence that screamed louder than any words. The days went by and I began to understand that the love I felt for Zhao was no longer the same. It wasn't love, it was survival. Every day I tried to guess his mood before he even said a word. I tried to predict his thoughts, avoid anything that could trigger that coldness, that empty look that made me feel insignificant. I gradually annulled myself without realizing the fear was becoming routine. If I already felt fear, seeing the reflection of that in my children broke my soul. Children notice everything much more than we imagine. They feel when something is wrong even if no one says a word, and my children learned when they were very young that the house where they were supposed to grow up with joy and safety was a minefield. They learned to walk slowly, not to speak loudly, not to cry when something hurt them. They learned to interpret the silence, to measure each step, each look. One day my oldest son approached me in the kitchen with his worried little eyes and whispered, "Mommy, today Daddy is angry." My heart broke. They already knew. They already understood that there were days when it was better to hide in the room, stay quiet, play without doing. What hurt me the most was knowing that I as a mother could not protect them. I told them that I knew. Well, I knew it was not true. I knew Zhao was honest, but not completely against the children. That day was a normal afternoon. Zhao came home from work in a bad mood like usual. I already knew his heavy gaze, his hard expression, so I tried to keep everything under control. I prepared dinner carefully. I avoided unnecessary conversations. I kept quiet, hoping that the night would pass without any problems. The children were in the living room playing. It was just another day. But then my youngest son tripped and dropped a glass on the floor. The sound of glass filled the house. And at that moment I knew. Zhao got up from his chair so fast that I didn't have time to react. His eyes fixed on the boy and his voice, which had previously been cold, turned into thunder. How many times have I told you to be careful? The scream echoed through the house like thunder. My son shrugged his shoulders. His little eyes filled with tears. My frightened son grabbed his brother's hand. I stood in front of him without thinking. Zhao, it was an accident. He looked at me as if he couldn't see me anymore. They don't listen to me. They do it on purpose. Then he threw the chair back and left the house, slamming the door so hard that the window panes shook. I stood there hugging the children, trying to calm their sobs of fear. It was at that moment that I realized that I wasn't just suffering. I was letting my children grow up in fear. I was unintentionally teaching them that behavior was normal and I couldn't allow that. That night, after the children went to sleep, I stayed awake staring at the ceiling. For years I convinced myself that there was no way out, that Zhao was my destiny, that I had to endure it, but now I saw things differently. If I stayed, my children would grow up thinking that fear was love. If I stayed, they would learn to deny themselves, to swallow their tears, to accept the unacceptable. And that was the last thing I wanted for them. I still didn't know how. I still didn't know when. But that night I made the hardest decision of my life. I was going to leave that house and this time I wasn't going to go back. The decision was made that night, lying in bed. I felt my heart beat differently. It wasn't the same fear as always. It was something else. A mixture of fear and courage at the same time. I had never thought about really leaving. For years, I convinced myself that I had no choice. That my life was one that I could somehow endure. But that day, when I saw my children trembling in front of Zhao, something inside me changed. There was no longer any doubt I needed to leave. The question now was, how did I know I couldn't just take the kids and leave at any moment? Zhao would notice. He always noticed everything, so I started planning. That very night after he fell asleep I sat by the window and thought about every detail. Where would I go? Who could help me? What would I take? The answer was frightening. I had no one. Over time Zhao pushed me away from everyone. My friends no longer cared. My family became just a memory that was exactly how he wanted it, but I couldn't let that hold me back, so I started to observe everything more carefully. The money that came in, the house keys, the times he left, every little detail could be the difference between success and failure. I decided I needed to save money, not too much, just enough to take the first step. I started hiding small amounts in places he would never look. Inside an old sock, at the bottom of a forgotten drawer, inside a book he would never open. It was little by little, penny by penny, and as I did this something inside me started to change. I was preparing myself for something that before seemed impossible. Zhao he controlled everything. He knew where I was going, who I was talking to, what I was doing, so I knew that leaving the house without him noticing would be a challenge. That's when I had the idea, without eating, about a distant cousin, someone he barely sees. I made up a story about her being sick and needing help. "TZ, I'll stop by in the morning to see how she's doing," I commented without giving it any importance. He didn't react, he just nodded, distracted by the newspaper. The next day I repeated it, and the day after that. I wanted him to get used to that idea, so that it would sound natural. And then on Friday I finally said, "I think I'll visit her tomorrow, but I'll be back before lunch." He didn't even look at me. "Do whatever you want." My heart raced. That was my chance. That night I put the kids to bed as usual, but inside I was a whirlwind. I knew that could be my last night there. I hugged each of them for longer than usual. I kissed their foreheads, smelled their scents, heard their calm breathing. Meanwhile, my heart was racing. I got up slowly. I went to the closet and grabbed some clothes. Just the essentials, nothing that would draw attention. I put everything inside a small bag, hid it under the bed and lay down, looking at the ceiling. I closed my eyes but didn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I knew that the next day everything would change forever. I just needed to leave without being seen. The clock marked its days in the morning. When I got up, Zhao was still fast asleep. The house was silent. I grabbed the bag. I took a deep breath and went to the children's room. "My dears, wake up. We need to go." They slowly opened their eyes, confused. "Where is Mom?" I bent down and held their hands. "To a place where you will never have to be afraid again." They didn't completely understand, but they trusted me. We snuck out, making no noise. Each step was a battle against my own heart, which was beating so hard that it seemed like it might wake Zhao. The front door was just a few feet away. My fingers touched the doorknob. I held my breath and then turned the key. The door opened. The morning sun touched my face and for the first time in a long time, I tasted freedom. I never looked back. The air that morning felt different. It had been years since I had felt the wind touch my face like that. He was not just a cold breeze, he was a breath of life, a breath of hope. I held my children's hands tightly and took the first step out of that house, a step that should have been simple but that carried a strength that only those who have lived in a visible prison understand. I didn't look back, I couldn't look. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it inside my heavy trembling heads, but I kept walking 1, 2, 3 steps without stopping. With each step I felt as if the weight of the years was being lifted off my shoulders, but the fear was still there. What if he woke up and realized I was gone and came after me? I didn't have a concrete plan, just the certainty that I couldn't go back. The boys were sleepy, confused, walking beside me without really understanding what was happening. Mom, where are we going? My oldest son asked. I knelt down in front of them and looked into each of their eyes. To a safe place was all I could say, because in truth I didn't know where we were going. I kept walking. Time seemed to be passing too quickly, and at the same time my mind was dragging on. My body was tired, but my mind was still on alert, repeating the same phrase like a mantra: I can't stop, I can't stop, I can't stop. When I got to a small bus stop, I looked around trying to calm down. It was early, the city was starting to wake up. I saw people going to work, children in school uniforms, the world spinning as if nothing was happening. But for me everything was different. I had nowhere to go. My friends were no longer in my life. My family was far away. I thought about asking for help, strangers, but how could I explain? Who would believe me? Who would help me? And then I remembered her, a neighbor from many years ago before Jao took me away from everyone, a woman with a good heart who always told me, if you ever need something, look for me. At the time I thought I would never need it. Now it was my only option. I took the last change I had and got on the first bus that passed every kilometer that took us away from home. It seemed like a relief, but also a weight. It was real. I had run away. When we got to her house I knocked on the door with trembling knuckles. Time seemed to stop until the doorknob turned and the kind face of Donna Lords appeared. She looked at me for a moment, and so before I could say anything she just opened her arms, and in that instant I collapsed. My knees weakened, and for the first time in years I let the tears fall without fear. I cried with my whole body. I cried for everything I had kept inside me for so long. I cried for the days of fear, for the forced smiles through the sleepless nights. I cried for having been weak. I cried for finally having been strong. Her arms held me tight as if they were trying to glue all the broken parts inside me. Come darling, you are safe now. Those words hit me hard. Safe. I didn't even remember what that was anymore. Donna Lords took us inside and made us some hot tea. The exhausted boys fell asleep on the couch. I looked at them lying there serenely, and it was at that moment that I realized they were sleeping without fear. For the first time they weren't curled up, they weren't wide-eyed. I heard heavy footsteps through the house, and that was what made me collapse again. But then fear came like a cold wave, and if Jao found me he would look for me, and when he realized I was no longer there I knew he wouldn't accept it easily. That same night while I was trying to sleep, a phone rang in Donna Lord's house. My heart raced. She answered, and I saw her expression change. Her eyes searched for me, full of concern. Yes, she is here. My blood ran cold. I knew he had found me. My whole body tensed, waiting for the worst. Donna Lords hung up the phone, slowly turned to me and held my hands. He's behind you. The words were like a blade cutting my skin. My heart seemed to want to burst out of my chest. He said something. My voice came out trembling. She took a deep breath. He said, you're going to have to go back. My mind was spinning. Go back after everything, after finally feeling the taste of freedom. My eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from fear, they were from anger, indignation and revolt for everything I've lived through, for everything he took from me, and more than ever I knew I would never go back to that house. But what would I do now? I still didn't know. I only knew that for the first time I was going to fight. At that moment my heart stopped. I knew that Jao wouldn't accept my escape easily, but hearing him say I had to go back made my whole body tremble. Go back after everything, after finally feeling the taste of freedom. My blood ran cold and my hands went cold. I looked at my children sleeping on the couch and I felt a knot tightening my throat. I couldn't let him take us back to that nightmare, but how could I stop it? Donna Lords held my hands and squeezed them tightly, looking me in the eyes. You don't have to go back, Helena. Those words made me fall apart. For years I thought I had no choice, that my life was already mapped out, that I would have to endure it. But sitting there in that house with fear knocking at the door, I understood something important. I did have a choice. I wouldn't go back. This time, Donna Lords made me sit on the couch and take a deep breath. She seemed calm, but I could see in her eyes the same concern that burned inside me. You need to think about what you're going to do now, she said. But my mind was in turmoil. What could I do? If Jao already knew where I was, he wouldn't stop until he found me. He never accepted losing control over me. We remained silent for a few minutes until a horrible thought crossed my mind. What if he was already on his way? My skin crawled. I stood up on impulse and ran to the window. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the street. It was empty. But until when, Lords? If he comes here? She took a deep breath. If he comes, we won't open the door. But would that be enough? Jao was the kind of man I didn't accept being ignored. I looked at my children again. They were still sleeping, oblivious to the terror that was growing inside me. I needed to act before it was too late. Donna Lourdes picked up the phone and dialed quickly. I have a friend who can help. She knows a place where you can hide for a while. My heart raced. What is it? She grabbed my hand. You know how much I want to not give up. I swallowed in silence. I never thought Zhao would believe he had any power over me. So I made my decision. Where do we need to go? She took a piece of paper and wrote down an address. Take the children and go to this house. It's a shelter for women in situations like yours. He'll never find you there. My eyes filled with tears. Are you absolutely sure? And then, without hesitation, I started getting ready to leave again. I grabbed a few things, the essentials. I hugged my children, trying to hide the nervousness in my voice. Let's go, my loves. Let's go see a new place. They yawned and followed me. Without question. Donna Lourdes walked me to the door and held me by the shoulders. Be strong. You're on the right path, my friends. Eyes were full of tears. Thank you Lourdes for everything. Take care my dear. And then with my heart racing I went out into that dark night. Each step was a challenge, each shadow seemed to be Zhao, but I kept walking away from that which almost destroyed my life. My heart said that it was not all over yet, but for the first time in years I felt something inside me grow, a strength that Zhao never managed to destroy, and at that moment I promised myself I would never again be a prisoner of fear. The street was dark, silent. Each step I took seemed to echo inside my head. My children walked beside me holding my hands, small and innocent, without completely understanding what was happening to them. It was still an adventure for me. It was a test of survival. I felt my heart beating strongly in my chest. Fear made me want to look back every second, but I knew I could not hesitate. Zhao already knew I was gone, and I had no idea how far he would go to find me. As we walked towards the bus stop, my mind did not stop. What if he was already looking for me, and if at that exact moment he was driving through the streets trying to guess where could I have gone? I felt like an animal running away from the hunter. I knew that at any moment he could appear. And then, as if my own thought had summoned him, I felt a headlight illuminate our backs. The sound of a car approaching. My chest tightened. I clutched my children's hands. I didn't want to look, but I needed to look. I turned my face slowly. The car passed by. It wasn't him, but that simple moment made me feel firsthand what it meant to live in fear. I never knew what freedom was. True freedom wasn't just leaving that house. It was leaving the fear he put inside me. When the bus finally arrived, I took a deep breath and got on with the children. Every little detail seemed surreal. The noise of the engine. The dim lights illuminating the worn seats. The smell of dust mixed with the early morning breeze. I sat in the back, hugging my children. They were already starting to close their eyes from sleep. As I looked out the window, I saw the city pass by. Every street, every building, every corner that had once been part of my routine, but now it was all past. There in that old, silent bus, I was leaving everything behind. I should have felt at peace. I should have felt safe. But the fear was still with me. And then my heart stopped. For a moment, because I saw a black car driving slowly down the street next door, and I knew it was him. The car slowed down. My eyes stayed fixed on the bus's rear view mirror. My chest was knotted. It was John. I would recognize that car anywhere, and at that moment he wasn't just a car on the road, he was a shadow trying to pull me back to hell. My whole heart stiffened. He couldn't see me there. No, now I looked at my eyes. They were innocent. I could let that nightmare catch up with them again, so I did the only thing I could. I got down on the seat and prayed he wouldn't see me. The bus stopped at a traffic light. John's car did too. My heart seemed to explode inside my chest. He was there. I could feel my breathing get heavy. If he looked out the bus window, he would see me. If he saw me, I knew what would happen. The bus started moving again. The car got left behind. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of relief mixed with the fear that still wouldn't let me go completely, but I knew he wouldn't give up that easily. I needed to get to the shelter. I needed to disappear before it was too late. When we finally got off the bus, I felt my legs shaking. The address that Donna Lourdes gave me was of a simple house with lighted windows and a low iron gate. I hesitated before knocking. What if they didn't accept us? What if there was no room for us? What if the door opened before I could finish my thought? A woman with a kind look appeared. You are Helena. My voice faltered. Yes, she smiled. Between you are safe now. My eyes filled with tears, not from fear, not from sadness, but for the first time in years from a relief so deep that I didn't even know I was still capable of feeling. I picked up my children in my arms and went into that house, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I belonged somewhere. I still had a long way to go, but there, that night in that house full of stories similar to mine, I knew that Zhao would never lay his hands on me again, and that was the beginning of Everything, the door of that house closed behind me, and for a second everything went silent. My feet were on unfamiliar ground, but for the first time in years I didn't feel like I was stepping in eggs. I looked around trying to understand where I was. It was a simple cozy house. The smell of coffee and fresh bread came from the kitchen. On the couch some women were talking quietly, some with tired looks, others with attentive eyes as if they were always waiting for the worst. But what caught my attention the most was something I hadn't seen for a long time, an environment where no one was afraid. The woman who opened the door led me to a small room with a simple bed, a wooden closet and a chair. Here you can rest, it's a safe place. Security, that word sounded strange to me. For so long I had been waiting for danger, waiting for the next moment of tension, that I didn't even know what it was to feel safe anymore. I laid my children down on the bed, covering them with a light blanket. They were so tired that they fell asleep in seconds. I hugged my own arms, feeling the cold of dawn still stuck to my skin, and then for the first time in a long time I cried. But it wasn't a cry of fear, it was a cry of relief from the pain accumulated from years of anguish being shed in silent tears. I hugged my knees and let it all out. The silence of the night enveloped me, and the only sound that filled the room was the echo of the feeling that I could never show. But now I was free. The sun came in through the crack in the window, and for a moment I felt disoriented. For years I woke up with a weight on my chest, a fear of what the day would bring. But that day I woke up and heard the sound of silence. There were no heavy footsteps in the hallway, there were no doors slamming, there was no tension in the air as if anything could turn into a storm. My children were still sleeping, their serene little faces without the worry they always carried when they woke up. I got up slowly and left the room into the living room. I found some women sitting around the table drinking coffee. Some were talking quietly, others just stared into space, lost in their own thoughts. The woman who welcomed me the night before smiled at me. "How are you feeling?" I didn't know how to answer. My mind was still confused, my heart still carried remnants of fear, but I took a deep breath and tried to find the words. Different. She felt as if she understood exactly what I wanted to say. "It will take a while, but you will see. One day you will wake up, you will no longer feel afraid." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that one day this weight would leave my chest, but I knew that Zhao wouldn't give up so easily, and if he was still looking for me, and if somehow he found me, the fear was still there like a ghost. But now I was no longer alone. That same afternoon one of the coordinators of the shelter came to me. She was holding a phone in her hand and her expression was serious. "Helena, we need to talk." My skin crawled. She sat next to me and took a deep breath before speaking. "Zhao was at the police station earlier today." My heart froze. "What?" He said. "He filed a police report saying that you kidnapped the children." Nausea rose in my stomach. "Kidnapping? But they are my children." She held my hand. "We know that, but man, how do they do this all the time? They use any trick to maintain control." My head was spinning. Zhao didn't accept losing, and now he was trying to use the law against me. "What do I do?" My voice was low, almost a whisper. The coordinator smiled slightly, but it was a smile full of seriousness. "We are going to help you." I never knew what it was like to have real help, but now for the first time someone was on my side. After that conversation my mind was still in shock, but I knew I needed to be strong, not for myself but for my children. That night as I was putting them to sleep, my oldest son looked me in the eyes and said something that made my heart ache. "Mommy, we are going to have a real home now." I held back the tears. I ran my hand through his hair and smiled. "Yes, my love, we are going to have a home." He smiled. He closed his eyes and fell asleep, and I sat there next to them looking at the ceiling, thinking about everything I saw, thinking about how Zhao tried to break me but failed. I was still there, still breathing, still fighting, and now for the first time I felt that the fight was worth it. Freedom doesn't happen overnight. It's not enough to just leave the house. You have to get the person out of you, and that was my next challenge. But in that moment, sitting next to my children, listening to the peaceful sound of the night, I knew that for the first time in many years I was on the right path. I was no longer a prisoner, I was a survivor, and that was just the first page of my new story. The shelter was safe, but physical safety didn't mean my mind was free. I could be away from Zhao, away from the house where I spent years walking on eggshells, but the fear was still inside me. It wouldn't go away just because I walked through a door and said goodbye. It was there in my sleepless nights, startled at every knock on the door, in the irrational terror whenever an unknown number called the shelter's phone. No matter how much the walls of that place protected me, I still didn't feel completely free, and in a way Zhao knew this. The shelter's coordinator told me that Zhao was trying to find me. He had already gone to the police station, he had already spread lies about me, he had already tried to make the law work in his favor, but he didn't stop there. The days went by, and every time one of the women from the shelter came back from the street I felt my body freeze, waiting for one of them to say the words I feared so much. And then one day it happened. One of them came into the house, took off her coat and looked at me with a worried look. "Helena, there's a man asking about you outside." My skin froze. "What do you mean?" She sat down next to me, lowering her voice so the other women wouldn't hear. "I went to the grocery store nearby and I saw a man asking about a woman with 2 children. My breath caught in my chest. He saw you." She shook her head. "No," but by the way he spoke I felt it was him. I closed my eyes. My whole body was shaking. He was too close. If he knew where I was he wouldn't stop until he found me, and if he showed up at the door of the shelter, and if he could make me come back. The simple idea left me breathless, but then something inside me screamed louder. No, no, this time I didn't go through all that to let fear drag me back to him. I had left that house to change my story, and I wouldn't allow him to write it again. I spent the night awake, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, my body tired but my mind working at one. I never thought there would come a time when I would be more angry than afraid, but that night that's exactly what happened. The anger grew inside me, an indignation that I had never allowed myself to feel. Why did he still think he had power over me? Why did he still think he Could decide what I would do with my life. I clenched my fists and sat on the bed. I couldn't live anymore running away. I needed to act. I needed to put an end to it, and I knew exactly what to do. The next morning I made a decision that I never imagined I would have the courage to make. I asked to speak to the shelter coordinator. When I sat down in front of her, my heart was racing but my voice was firm. I want to report you. She looked me in the eyes and smiled slightly. Are you sure? I didn't hesitate. I am. She nodded. So we will help you. It was the first time I felt that someone was truly on my side, that my pain was not invisible, that I was no longer alone. That same day I was taken to the police station by an assistant from the shelter. Each step towards that door seemed to weigh tons, but at the same time I knew it was when I sat down in front of the clerk and started telling my story. I felt like a weight was being lifted off my chest. Word by word I brought to the surface everything I had lived, the years of silence, the fear, the looks that made me tremble, the veiled threats, the moments when I thought I wouldn't survive. And when I finished, the clerk just looked at me and said, "You did the right thing. Get out of there." With a piece of paper in my hands, it was a protective measure. I still felt afraid, but that day I also felt something new. I felt that for the first time in a long time, I no longer had control over myself. I returned to the shelter feeling a lightness I had never felt before. The other women looked at me and noticed that I was different. My eyes were no longer downcast. My breathing was no longer shallow. I still had a long way to go. There were still wounds that needed to heal. But I knew at that moment that something essential had changed. I was no longer a woman who ran away. I was a woman who fought. And I would not let my past define my future. That night I lay down in bed with my children and hugged them tightly. They were already used to seeing me worried, looking at the door, holding the fear inside me. But this time my oldest son looked into my eyes and said, "Mommy, are you happy?" The question had taken me by surprise for so long that I no longer knew what happiness meant. But there, at that moment, I realized that yes, I was happy. Not because everything was resolved. Not because the fear had disappeared. But because I was finally in control of my own life. And that, more than anything else, was the greatest victory I could have, and this victory was just the beginning. In the days that followed, I began to notice something different. For years, I woke up feeling afraid of what Zhao would do. Afraid of making a mistake, of saying the wrong word, of breathing the wrong way. But that morning, when the first rays of sunlight touched my skin, fear was not the first thing I felt. I slowly opened my eyes and for a moment I just lay there, listening to the light breathing of my children beside me. They were peaceful and sleeping without any problems. Fear, and for the first time in a long time I felt something I almost didn't recognize. I felt peace. I got out of bed slowly, trying not to wake the children, and went to the window. The street outside seemed normal like all the others, cars passing by, people going to work, neighbors talking about trivialities, but for me that world was new. For years I had lived trapped inside a routine where each step was calculated, where each day was just another survival. Now I could simply go out, I could walk on the street without worrying about what time I should return. I could talk to whoever I wanted without fear of the consequences. I could choose, but at the same time that this freed me, it also scared me. What would I do now? How do you start over from scratch after having lived a whole life in fear? I didn't have all the answers, but for the first time I wanted to look for them. That very day the shelter coordinator called me for a conversation. "Helena, now that you are safe, we need to think about the next steps." My hands clasped in my lap. "What are the next steps?" She looked at me with affection. "You need to rebuild your life, and for that you need to have a place of your own." Those words hit me like a shock. A place of my own. The idea seemed so far away. After all, I could do it. "But how can we help you find a job in a small apartment? It won't be anything luxurious, but it will be yours." My heart raced. Work, home, independence. That was all John had ever told me, that I couldn't do it without him. But now I had the chance to prove him wrong, that he never had power over me, that I was always capable. They just didn't let me see it. In the following days, with the help of the shelter, I started looking for a job. It was strange. It was like I had to learn to live again. The last time I really worked was before I married John. He wouldn't let me work. He said he would take care of everything, but taking care of everything meant controlling everything. Now sitting in front of a manager in a small bakery in the neighborhood, my hands felt sweaty. He read my resume. He looked at me and smiled. "You have experience as a waitress." My voice almost broke, but I took a deep breath. "It's been a long time, but I learn fast." He nodded. "You know what I like most in new employees? Disposition. You have." I looked him in the eyes. I had faced hell and survived. I had spent years afraid to breathe, and now I was there, ready to fight for my life. "Yes, I have. So it can start on Monday." For a moment I thought I hadn't heard him right. "Start. The job is yours." My chest filled with a different warmth, joy, pride, freedom. I left the interview and felt tears welling up in my eyes. I had made it. I was starting over. That night I sat with my children on the bed and told them the news. "Mom got a job." They looked at me curiously. "So we're going to have a real home?" I asked my oldest son. I held his little hand and smiled. "Yes, my love." His face lit up and he jumped on my lap, hugging me tight. "I knew you were going to make it." My heart squeezed for So long Zhao made me believe that I was nothing without him, but there in that small hug full of love I knew that I was everything to those boys, and that was enough. With my first salary I managed to rent a small apartment. It was simple, just 2 rooms, peeling walls, a mattress on the floor, but it was mine. For the first time I had a place where no one controlled me, where no one told me what to do, what to wear, what to say. The first night there was strange, the silence was different from what I was used to, but when I lay down on the mattress and saw my children sleeping next to me, I felt a peace I had never felt before. I had nothing luxurious, but I had my freedom, and that was worth more than any wealth. In the months that followed, my life was slowly but surely changing. I was able to buy used furniture. We painted the walls of the apartment together. With each passing day the fear became less, and a new emotion grew inside me, hope. One day while I was watching my children playing in the living room, I felt a tightness in my chest, but this time it wasn't pain, it was gratitude. Gratitude for having had the courage to leave, gratitude for having found support, gratitude for being alive, and above all gratitude for never having given up on myself, because in the end freedom wasn't just escaping from Zhao, it was finding myself again, and I was just beginning to truly live. The years went by. I could say it was easy, that after I left that house everything was resolved as if by magic, but the truth is that starting over is a long, painful process, and often lonely. I had days when I looked at my children and wondered if I was doing the right thing, if I would be able to give them a decent life, if one day the fear would disappear completely. But then I saw their eyes, and in them there was no more fear, there was no more that tense look, that hesitation before speaking, that fear of existing. They were free, and that was the greatest proof that I made the right choice. For a long time fear still accompanied me, even after the protective measure, even after changing address, even after rebuilding my life. There were still nights when I woke up startled, with my heart racing, feeling as if Zhao was there, but he was no longer. These moments became rarer. Over time I realized that fear only has power over us when we feed it, and I decided that I would not give it that privilege anymore. So each day I was freeing myself a little more, with each smile from my children, with each achievement, every moment when I looked in the mirror and saw a strong woman. I was leaving that past behind. I was no longer that broken Helena, everyone who believed there was no way out. I was the woman who survived, who fought, and who won. And Zhao, he was left behind. He no longer has space in my story. One day while organizing the small apartment I built for myself and my children, I found a forgotten box at the bottom of the closet. Inside it were old letters, diaries, little reminders of who I was before Zhao. And there, in the middle of everything, I found a folded piece of paper. When I opened it, I immediately recognized it as an essay I had written when I was still a girl at school. The title said, "When I grow up, I want to help other people find their way." I remembered how, as a child, I dreamed of being a teacher, of doing something that would change people's lives. But over the years, Zhao destroyed each of those dreams. He made me believe that I was not capable, that my only role in the world was to serve him, to be the woman he wanted me to be. But at that moment, holding that paper, yellowed by time, something inside me woke up. I was still alive, and that meant there was still time to dream. As the years went by, I grew up, evolved, became stronger. I got a better job. I studied. I learned new things, and one day I made a decision that would change everything again. I went to the shelter that welcomed me at that most difficult time in my life. I looked at that simple house where I had entered one day, destroyed, aimless, without hope. And I saw other women arriving. Women who, like me, once were, carried the weight of fear in their eyes. And it was there that I knew I needed to help, so I started working as a volunteer. I started listening to stories, holding trembling hands, offering a shoulder to those who had no one. With each woman I met, I realized that my story wasn't just mine. It was the story of many others. If I could get out, others could too. If one day I was saved, now it was my turn to save others. Years later, I received unexpected news. Zhao had been arrested. He tried to repeat the cycle with another woman, but this time he couldn't escape the consequences. When I heard this, I felt a mix of feelings. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it proved something. He was never as strong as he made me believe. I was the one who was always strong. I was the one who survived. I was the one who had the courage to leave. He was just a weak man who thought he could control someone else's life. And at that moment, I knew that I would never need to look back. My life was the present and, above all, the future. If you had met me years ago, you would have seen a fragile woman, lost and full of fears. But today, if you look me in the eyes, you will see someone else. A woman who has known pain but hasn't let it define her. A woman who, despite everything, still believes in love. Not in love that imprisons, not in the love that destroys, but in true love, in self-love, in love for life, and mainly in love for who I have become. Because if there is something that Zhao has never been able to take from me, it was my essence. It has always been here, dormant, wounded, hidden by years of pain but never destroyed, and today it shines brighter than ever. If you are listening to this story and feel that it somehow reflects yours, if you feel that you are trapped in an endless cycle, if you believe that there is no way out, know that there is. I am living proof of that. And if I can get out, you can too. It may not be easy. It may take time, but one day you will wake up and fear will no longer be the first thing you feel. One day you will look in the mirror and see a strong woman, a free woman, a woman who won, just as I won and just as you can win. Thank you for getting me this far. I hope that my story has helped you see the world in a different way. If you can help me by subscribing to the channel and liking the video, I will be very grateful for this act of kindness. See you later. 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 Act of kindness. See you later.